This is the front-lit overclocked Game Boy Advance I made in my last video. As you can see, when it turns on, the screen is front-lit, and by using this switch right there, just put it in the on position. Now it's overclocked. This won't work because of the flash card in there. It doesn't work with the overclock. It gives me some error messages and the game won't start, which is annoying because I have Pokemon games on there, which I can't go back to normal speed. So anyway, I'm not going to touch on the front light itself. What I'm actually going to do is the clock itself, which is buried inside. You can kind of see it through the plastic there. It's that mess of stuff. You can kind of see the reflection off the tape. So basically, what happens is inside the brains of the game, there is a chip, a crystal. And this is just an oscillator, and what it does is it puts out a pulse. I believe this one is just over 4. Yeah, it's 4 point something megahertz. So every second it just sends out a tick, basically, and that tick goes to the brain, which every time it gets a signal, it does a computation. So when you overclock it, what you do is you replace this with a faster chip. The one I put in here is 8 megahertz. So every second, 8 million pulses go to the processor, which is responsible for a faster game. I could demonstrate that a little bit. Right, you can tell what's going on there. I don't want to take this apart right now, but basically on the inside of the machine, when you take the back off, you see the bottom of the circuit board, and what you do then is you unscrew the circuit board. There should be like 2 or 3 screws on the inside of the board, the inside of the game, holding the board to the front. Take those screws out, put them safe, and then you take the board and you flip it over. On the board, I want to say it's in this area right here. It's behind the screen, but there is there's the cartridge bay slot that goes in the back there. And then when you flip the screen over, or when you flip the board over, there's a crystal back there, and basically it's kind of an oval. That's a artist rendering with, usually it has 4 little solder tabs, 2 on either side. I'm getting very close to the microphone. Those, as far as I can tell, those are linked kind of on the bottom, so they're kind of connected to each other like that, which means that connecting to this side is the same as connecting to that side. There might be tabs on top which are used for like power, but from what I understand, either side works fine. Now you will need a decent soldering skill to get in there in the first place, because they're very tiny. This is not to scale. I don't know if I have any of the chips around here. They're about the same size as just standard crystals. So you get your soldering iron in there. What I did is I laid the wire flat across. This is wire here. Laid it across the connector there, and you need a cone-shaped tip. Basically, you could do this with a chisel, I suppose, if you're a robot, but you use the cone and touch it. I won't go into soldering itself because there are a lot of videos and tutorials on how to do that. But basically you get 2 wires connected to this terminal and this terminal, and you just send them off. And what I did was I brought them over there's a gap kind of in the board, just somewhere up there where you can bring them over. I chose to put the switch here because there wasn't a lot of room for it. I bought the switch at Fry's Electronics, which depending on where you live you might not have. Fry's Electronics is a electronics superstore chain kind of thing, like Radio Shack on steroids, back when Radio Shack carried electronic components like this. This is just a teeny tiny side switch. I think I spent like $1.50 on this, but all it is a 3-position, that's a 2-position switch. Single throw double pull. I forgot the terminology. Basically, I just nipped one of the leads off and I connected one lead to the switch. This is the switch again, masterful renditioning. One lead to the auxiliary crystal that goes in like that, and the other one went back to there. Now the switch is of course completely optional. I chose to put it in there because I didn't want to be playing at top speed all the time, because like I said, the Easy Flash won't work with the chip, the oscillator, the 8 megahertz. It is recommended. I chose to put it here. I kind of went around to find a good place for it. I did some practice drilling in the old shell, which I don't seem to have within arm's reach of me at the moment, but I used just a handheld, well, I used a power drill actually, which is not the best thing I could have used, but I don't have a Dremel and I don't have like carving tools, plastic tools. You maybe could use a soldering iron to melt through the plastic. If you got like a temperature controlled iron, you could do that quite easily. I wouldn't recommend that, to be honest. That's a disaster waiting to happen. Essentially, all I had to do was drill 2 holes right next to each other, the distance, an appropriate distance apart, and then I used a knife. You could use an X-Acto knife. These are huge. You could use an X-Acto knife or a craft knife or a utility knife, just whatever to connect those 2 holes, just so you can get some switch motion and clean up and square up the corners just so it goes. And to hold the switch in place, I think I had to epoxy it in place. I didn't have any super glue or hot glue at the time, so I just mixed up a little bit of epoxy, 2-part epoxy, and slathered it on there. Again, not the best tool I would have used. I would have preferred to go with well, I don't know, epoxy might work better in the long run. It's sturdy, it's holding itself in there. It wasn't the easiest to install in the first place because it takes a while to tacky to where you can just put it in place and leave it. As for the crystal itself, like I said, you can kind of see it there. I had to wrap it in electrical tape because the body of the crystal is made of metal and I don't want it shorting against other things inside, which did happen. Right, so there is this post in here, just kind of a support post. It's right next to the screw hole. I don't know if you can see it. See the circle there? That's just a post, and that connects from the back of the shell, and it just goes down and rests on the motherboard, and that just adds rigidity. If you put this crystal here, you have to be careful that the post isn't interfering with the wire, because it's either the post or the screw, because if the wire gets sandwiched in there and the insulation breaks, it'll short one of the wires, which actually gave me an underclocked Game Boy. It was running at half the rate for some reason. I don't know why did that, but not what you want, so you gotta be careful with that. Anyway, I'm running low on memory here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take this, upload this. Let me know if you have any other questions on this. I mean, I probably have lots of questions. I'm not a definitive guide. There are a lot of resources on the internet. I basically just googled overclock Game Boy Advance, and that gave me pretty much everything I needed to get in there. Knowledge of like solder